a tag experience.
And wish to join us in the chat room, visit paltalk.com. Go to the social issues, select other, and enter the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Hello, everyone. Trish Sheridan, host of A Global Focus. Come join us each Friday evening at A Global Focus's new time, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Come join the discussion.
Light up your night with The Kevin Smith Show. Hi, this is Kevin Smith. Join me Monday through Friday right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hey, hi there. Got your attention? I'm Gia Scott, and I was curious what you were doing from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays. See, I host this really interesting little radio program that airs live then, and we bring in all sorts of guests. Authors, experiencers, and everything in between. It's paranormal and guaranteed to make you go, My guest list is always up at www.giascott.com, and do tune in to the Dawn of Shades from 7 to 9 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Breaking news. Strange black pyramid UFO ships over every major city on the Earth. People are exhilarated and scared. Reptilian strange creatures are beaming down. My God, they're beaming me up with them. Don't put that probe there. Don't put that probe there. Don't put Listen to the Judge of Mabus radio show at 11 p.m. Eastern, Saturday nights with host Jeffrey Pritchett, bringing you the high strange. Visit www.judgeofmabusradio.com. That's www.judgeofmabusradio.com.
Tune in to the Mind Cemetery with your hosts Chip and Nicole every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also check us out on our website, Mind-Cemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, Mind-Cemetery.com.
Hey everybody, this is Morris from Perspective X. If you've been searching for a variety talk radio show with an edge, then look no further. Join my co-host Stephanie Benetti and I as we get down and dirty discussing the latest hot topics and relevant newsworthy stories. Informative, engaging, and quite often controversial, Perspective X is a unique blend of insight, opinion, and wit. So tune in and listen every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. on UPRN 107.9 FM New Orleans. It's not just an opinion, it's our perspective. Perspective X.
Hi everybody, this is Erica Getch. I hope to see you on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific on the Galactic Connection, keeping you connected 1 hour at a time. For more information, please visit thegalacticconnection.com.
You are listening to UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can catch us every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Central, where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome to the Mind Cemetery. This is where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest. As always, we will do our best every week to delve into the unexplained, weird, intriguing, creepy topics you won't hear on your local news. I'm your host, Chip, and along with me is my co-host, Nicole. You can catch the Mind Cemetery every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for 2 hours exclusively here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. If you like what you hear, then subscribe to us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter by searching Mind Cemetery. You can also find us on iTunes by searching UFO Paranormal Radio Network, listen to our archives on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network main page, and go deeper into the archives by searching for the Mind Cemetery on blogtalkradio.com. You can find us online at mindcemetery.com. While on our site, you will find our show calendar to see who we will have on as a guest in the near future. Check out the strange news feed, peruse our extensive archive of past shows in our archive blogs, track UFO activity via the Alien Stalker, and as always, be sure to check out the critically acclaimed, often imitated but never duplicated mindcemetery.com blog, where you can get information on upcoming shows, information on past shows, and plenty of interesting nuggets and tidbits that are blogged about throughout the week. You can join the discussion in the UFO Paranormal Radio Network chat room on Pal Talk, or call in to ask your favorite hosts and guests your own questions on our show hotline. That number is 504-273-7379.
Very much for joining us tonight again here on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And that phone number again, because I rattle it off very fast, is 504-273-7379. 504-273-7379. If anybody wants to call in with any questions tonight for our guests later on, we'll be introducing James Stein. He wrote a book called The Paranormal Equation, a new scientific perspective on remote viewing, clairvoyance, and other inexplicable phenomena. Pretty much sums it up right there. So, like I said, thanks for joining us tonight for yet another episode of the Mind Cemetery, right? And so, we do have a show, Instant Karma. They were wondering if we were going to have a show in the chat room, and of course, how could I not disappoint? Very easily, right? Either way. It goes either way. So, let's see. Tonight, what I wanted to do is start redoing how I do the show, kind of, and start out with a little news, current event type stuff in paranormal, UFO world, and try to get some a little bit of structure, at least at the beginning of everything, because, as you know, it's pretty unstructured. I try to, keep it free-flowing as much as possible with the questions, and I pretty much quit doing a lot of listening to a lot of other shows. So, and that way I don't get too much loaded with other crap, and with any luck I'll not rehash a lot of stuff from other episodes out there in the, podcast world, I guess, or internet radio world. So, I won't cover absolutely everything that's new, but we'll get a little bit of it there, Lunister. So, first off, I got some retweets today from the good folks at the new Weird News Daily, and I told them, I said, for the retweets, I'll get out there and plug you a little bit tonight. And let's see, they are checking them out. They're just that, weird news. So they post a lot of stuff about fiction writers, authors, horror writers, paranormal writers. They also have a lot of good videos up here. They've got one up there that I just got done checking out. Was called, it's titled Caught on Camera Animal Cam, okay? And it's a typical night vision camera that you see all the time out in the middle of the woods, it looks like. And in the middle of it, when you watch it, you get to see a little orb-looking thing kind of go diagonal through the screen. and just float up and out. So who knows what that could have been. But I was watching and looking around the screen, wondering what the hell's going to pop out. Is it going to be a joke? What's it going to be? And there it was. It subtly came across, and that's it. And that was shared by Maximum Disclosure there on the Weird News Daily. So you can just Google them and check them out, and you'll be able to find them fairly easily. They're about the third one down when you check them out. I think it's Alan Lennon that runs it out there, and he retweeted us for saying we got some weird news on our site, so check us out. So, one book that they're talking about reviewing here is an interview there with Simon O'Kill, author of Nobody Loves a Bigfoot Like a Bigfoot Babe. Well, I just thought, that's good. That's interesting, at least. There's one about London Haunts, UFOchronicles.com link to here on the bottom. Navajo Task Force investigates UFOs and the paranormal. So, bag here. It's a potpourri of paranormal and weirdness. So, go ahead and check it out. It's worth a look. To a little one-stop shop. So there's that. Thanks for the retweet earlier. In other news out there, a lot of movie news. A couple things here. A new Wolverine movie is coming out soon. Just the Wolverine. I don't know. It takes place after the original X-Men trilogy. So, okay. Good enough. But I guess it has the Silver Samurai in it, so I don't know how that's going to work out. I don't know if he'll end up killing him, but there is cameos in here with Femke Janssen, so who knows how that's going to be. Probably some stupid dream sequence, because after the original trilogy, of course, she's dead, so, see how that works out. And then if you're a zombie fan, we'll touch on a couple of things here. There's some new World War Z posters out where basically the zombies are just building a pile and jumping on a helicopter and all that good stuff. I don't know if we have any zombie fans here. Probably not. Just a couple 100,000, I guess. But, so, of course, that'll be a good time. And who knows when that's coming out? I don't know for sure. I haven't seen a release date on it. Oh, June 21st. So, of this year, that is. So that had been rumored in the works for a real long time, and everybody's, very thrilled to have that coming down the pipe, especially with shows like The Walking Dead priming the pump, which, by the way, of course, was on last night. And if you failed to catch it, then you missed out on some good stuff. Mainly, you get to see Merle die. So, spoiler alert, post-spoiler alert. So Merle was going to hand over Michonne, starts driving her up to the governor in Woodbury. He gets about halfway there, decides to kick her out and says, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And then you see Merle get drunk and start blasting music. And for a second, I thought he was listening to Motorhead for a little bit, it sounded like. But then I thought, no, this is A&E. They wouldn't play something that you already knew. It's going to be some nobodies that they don't have to pay a buttload of money to, so to get the rights to play it and all that kind of junk. But it sounded awfully like him. I'm not sure if it really was or not. But, so he's just sitting in there getting drunk in the car and like basically attracting zombies. And, who's Miss Merle? Jim Light says, someone explained it to her. I'm not going into it. But anyway, he's Daryl's brother. And you're probably going to say, who's Daryl? But that's fine. So, watch the show. It's worth the time. It gets slow in some spots, but it's well worth it now. Season finale is coming up next week. So, yeah, of course it's worth it. Anyway, he decides that he's going to, collect a herd of zombies by making a bunch of noise and just driving around drunk. And so he drives it up to the meeting spot where the governor is, and he, hops out, does the old barrel roll out of the car, and just lets it, roll up into the into the area where they're having the meeting, and then you see like a whole herd of zombies just start in the area, and then he just starts blasting some of the Woodbury guys, and zombies jumping on him and eating them and all that good stuff. But he eventually gets overtaken by the governor and a few other guys, and ends up getting shot. And then you see Daryl, who came after them both, Michonne and Merle, to try to bring them back, and then that's when you see the zombified Merle eating the corpse of this one kid, Ben, who was just an idiot punk anyway. So I was glad to see he was at least getting eaten. So that did good. So that done good, right? So that was a good scene, in my opinion. But then Daryl had to kill his zombie brother. So, so that was a good time. And then I've put on my Facebook page, my personal page, I was like, who do you think wants to kill the governor more? Michonne or Daryl now? So, or Glenn, actually. So you never know. But it was a pretty good episode last night, that's for sure. And of course, the LA will be good. Can't miss on that one when they come after the prison. So that's the TV zombie news and the movie news. And let's see, the only other thing I wanted to mention was about, second to last thing I'll talk about is Melba Ketchum and her DNA Bigfoot study out there. Speaking of nobody loves a Bigfoot like a Bigfoot babe, she just tried to help people that bought her paper or downloaded the paper, whether they bought it or not, I'm not sure. A lot of people were complaining, I don't see any of the data. Well, there's 3 terabytes of genome data, she says, and the supplemental data files can be downloaded with the paper. So it's a supplement. It's not going to be in the paper. It's 3 terabytes. Good luck with that, looking through there. So it's all out there. Basically, it's another species of kind of human and kind of not. So everybody that jumped on her and laughed at her for saying they're angels and all that kind of stuff, I can see where it probably wasn't the brightest move for her to do, because it really left her open for attack. But she was going down the path of them being giants and Nephilim and all that kind of stuff. We're not talking like winged angels here, but that's basically what she was talking about, and everybody laughed at her and just chewed her up even more. But last laughs are to be had here eventually, so we'll see where that all turns out for her. And it looks pretty good. A lot of the data does. So, from what I've heard at least. And everything's started to chill out, too. Imagine that, once the flames stopped being planned so hard as soon as she started releasing stuff. Because, of course, she's attacking the product of a lot of squatchers out there. So, yeah, you can see where they'd get little crazy to protect that. And why wouldn't you? Because it basically makes your research, if you can call it that even, obsolete. So, good luck hanging out in the woods with trail camps and all that good stuff. So that's it for that. And last, March is multiple sclerosis, sclerosis, say it right, idiot, Awareness Month. My mom had it, eventually died because of complications of it, so I'm going to mention it as often as I can. So go do a 5K or a bike or something like that and donate to National MS Society in your neck of the woods. So there's that. So now that we're done with all of that, we will get on with our show here. Tonight, like I said, we have guest author James Stein and his book, The Paranormal Equation, A New Scientific Perspective on Remote Viewing, Clairvoyance, and Other Inexplicable Phenomena. Ooh, having a hard time reading and speaking today. The double whammy. Both death sentences for a radio show, I guess, right? So, James, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Chip, for inviting me on your show, and I hope I can live up to and match the zombies and Bigfoot. It's a tough order.
I know it is, right?
We're going up against the A team here, or the Z team.
Yes, the Z and the B team.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I'm squarely planted in, I still don't think Bigfoot exists. You know, it's just the logistics of the whole thing for me. You know, you can't have, the base population, I think, to keep being propagated. It's just, how can you stay hidden? You know, in one aspect, you know, some of these squatchers out here will sit and say they're primitive and all this other stuff, and then the next they're this magical beast that no one can find and is brilliant. You know, it covers his tracks everywhere, and there's no houses, no huts. You know, well, I'm sure some people like to claim that some of these bear holes and the lean-tos and all that stuff are Bigfoot houses, but it's like, come on. You know, you can't have it both ways. You can't be this primate, ignoramus, and then, he's smart enough to avoid you, but not smart enough to not run out in front of your truck every once in a while.
Yeah, that's the argument I've always had about UFOs. I find UFOs fascinating, although
sure.
I've always, ever since I was a kid, I've found them sort of interesting, and although I don't pay much attention to it when I'm at home, whenever my wife and I go on a vacation and she's taking a shower or something like that, I'm either watching UFOs or Man vs. Food, roughly the same order of magnitude. But here's my problem with UFOs. Either they want to be seen or they don't. And my feeling is that if they want to be seen, all they have to do is, they can contact Bill O'Reilly or Anderson Cooper or somebody like that, and I think those guys will find time for them on the TV shows. And if they don't want to be seen, they've got the technology to get here, so they should sure as hell be able to manage that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a complicated subject right there for sure, because you're exactly right in that aspect. It's like, okay, we're talking about something that's either, A, crossed dimensions, or B, crossed the galaxy. Either way, they've got the capability to stay hidden if they want to, and then pop out and show themselves to whoever they want to when they want, and then run off. And if they really want you to know they're here, like you said, they'll find the venue to make themselves known, no problem. They don't need a publicist.
Well, the other possibility, I guess, is that they're the equivalent of 3-year-olds, and just like 3-year-olds on Earth like to play hide and seek and tease people, maybe this is what their 3-year-olds do.
They're just here to play.
Yeah, I just got a whole bunch of wild theories, so your listeners may be in for an evening of wonders.
Why not? It's good for them. It's good to exercise their brain every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, I think this stuff, I think talking about this stuff and thinking about it does exercise your brain, because I'm a scientist. Actually, I'm a math teacher, math professor, and we like to think of ourselves as scientists, although it's not clear that everybody else does. But one of the things that's always interested me is I got interested in the paranormal, I guess, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, because I read this wonderful science fiction novel called Slan by A.E. Van Vogt. And it was about a 13-year-old girl who was a telepath who lived in a society that hunted down telepaths as enemies of the state. And I think if I were to go back and read it, maybe there were some allegories to what was going on with the Nazis, because the book was written in about 46. But A, I fell in love with the heroine, and B, I thought it was just fantastically interesting that there could be such a capability as telepathy. And one of the things that, even though I'm a hardcore scientist and I'm skeptical about a bunch of things, my feeling is that if you're not interested in the paranormal, whether you believe in it or not, if you're not interested in it, you're dead between the ears, because the expansion of human capabilities beyond what we already know is a subject that just has to be fascinating to anyone who's got a brain to think about it.
I love that explanation right there. If you're not interested in it, you're dead between the ears, and that's dead on. It can't be said any better, because how can you sit and ignore a lot of the events and the topics and happenings that go on in the world, and then, stick it back in the sand that is your Facebook page or your Twitter account,
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have neither of those, so I don't have to worry about it. But I do have an interest in the paranormal, and I'm not the only scientist that does. There was a study that was done by a bunch of professors in the mid-1990s, and what they did was they surveyed a bunch of college professors. And what astounded me was that more than 50% of the college professors believed that ESP was either a reality or very likely. And these are the science professors. They're not the English literature professors or whatever, people who are perhaps more creatively inclined. But the science professors, more than 50% of them believed that ESP was either a reality or very, very likely. And despite the fact that there have been innumerable attempts to show that ESP is a real phenomenon, and basically they really haven't been sufficiently convincing that they've convinced the majority of the scientific community enough so that you could get publishable papers that the entire scientific community accepts the way that it accepts the theory of gravity or the theory of relativity or the atomic theory, all the theories that are known to be accepted. Nonetheless, here you have more than 50% of natural science professors believing that ESP is either a reality or very likely. So that just goes to show that even though they may be skeptical by trade, because science is something that it's a very conservative activity. You can put any sort of idea out there, but if you want it to be accepted, you got to back it up. And so far, there hasn't been the there hasn't been the hardcore data that backs it up. But nonetheless, a lot of science professors, more than 50%, believe that it's reality or pretty close to it. And I think that if you were to do a similar study, I think, for instance, you might find that the science professors would probably not feel comfortable with psychokinesis, moving things by the power of the mind. I don't think there's much evidence for that. But I personally believe that telepathy is going to be, telepathy will be established sometime in the hopefully not too distant future, but I don't think it's going to be telepathy by you're going to sit back and be able to read somebody else's thoughts. I think what's going to happen is they're going to be doing it technologically, because we already have things like electroencephalographs, and we know what portions of your brain light up when you're thinking about sex and when you're thinking about food and when you're thinking about football. And I think when you think about stuff, it's well known that what you do is you create electrochemical changes in your brain, and these changes, I think, are going to manifest themselves. They certainly manifest themselves within the brain. I think they probably manifest themselves outside the brain, and I think that sooner or later we're going to have the technology to detect it, and then it's merely a matter of finding the Rosetta Stone that enables us to associate spike 1 here, on this particular display screen with what people are thinking about. So I think, the government investigated it. The government sunk money into trying to create telepathy between soldiers. And my feeling is that you don't trust the government. The government spends some money in pretty dumb fashion, but they at least thought it was worth a shot.
Exactly. And what I like, when I think about what the government does with their money, especially military-wise, when they do dump it in, it's always to weaponize it, right? It's like so.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the business that they're in. But you brought up there's a very interesting question that's associated with this, because I've done a number of interviews in connection with this book, and one of the things people always ask is, what's it going to take to convince people that a particular phenomenon is a reality? Well, part of what you have to do, maybe UFOs are different. If a UFO lands in the middle of Washington, D.C., like it did in the movie, there was this movie in the 1950s, which has totally eluded me for the time being, but It wasn't Forbidden Planet, which was in the middle of the 1950s, but there was a flying saucer. If it lands in Washington, people are going to believe it. But a lot of phenomena, in order to convince scientists, what you have to do is you have to do some serious studies. And who puts up money for serious studies? Because scientists are like everybody else. They got to eat. They got to put a roof over their heads, so they need money. And so the people who are going to invest money in science are the same people that do now. That's either the government or private corporations. And there's got to be a bottom line payoff. And what's the bottom line payoff for, for, maybe proving ESP? For corporation, not so much. For government, maybe not so much either. But for telepathy, now that's something that could be weaponized, as you pointed out. And so that's why I think the government put money in it. And also another reason they put money in it, they started dumping money in it in the 70s when they found out that both the Russians and the Chinese were looking at this. And if we weren't going to lose the space race to the Russians, we sure weren't going to lose the telepathy race either.
Exactly. I was about to get to that. Yeah, if another country like Russia was going to be throwing money at it, you bet we were going to throw it too,
Oh, yeah.
We could see, just in case we're missing out on something, whether it's true or not, And I was going to go back to mention the study that went out about the scientists in academia that were questioned about stuff. Do you know if those were actually, if it was like an anonymous survey, or was it one that had...
Oh, yeah, it was a legitimate survey, and it was published in a legitimate psychological journal. I could probably look it up, or as a friend of mine says, ask Mr. Google. It's actually in my book, which I probably have somewhere around here, but what I can do is in the break at the top of the hour, I can look for it. But the point is that there are a bunch of what I think people outside the scientific community don't realize is that science is very much like baseball. There are all sorts of levels to the game, and there are highly prestigious journals, the equivalent of Major League Baseball, and then there are ones that are, a little less prestigious, and down at the bottom of the line, you've got the Class D minor leagues. And there are a number of scientists who have a firm belief in the paranormal and the supernatural. And they're taking a huge risk when they investigate it, because the scientific community, you're treading on thin ice when you go in this direction. And some of the scientists who have looked at it in this era, because there was an era, for instance, in Victorian England, people were much more open about investigating these things silently, and a whole bunch of world-class scientists at the time did look at it. But now, my guess is that there's only one real world-class scientist looking into the paranormal, and that's a guy named Brian Josephson. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1973 for studies involving quantum mechanics. And when you win the Nobel Prize in Physics, you're not just in the major leagues, you're an all-star. In fact, you're probably in the Hall of Fame, relatively speaking. And so somebody like Brian Josephson, who's essentially made his reputation, he hasn't got anything to lose. He can go out and look at these things, and everybody says, even though it's still going to, just because Brian Josephson is looking at it, doesn't mean that it's convinced a whole lot of people, but nobody bears him any grudges for looking at it, or is going to take any academic reprisals, because a guy who's achieved as much as you can achieve in this particular area. So he's free to do whatever he wants. But there are a whole lot of scientists, and if you put in a grant to investigate telepathy, you're not going to find anybody really interested in funding your grant. And not only that, your colleagues are going to look at you a little suspiciously, and if you do obtain results, unless they're results that are so clear-cut that they convince everybody, if you're going to publish it, you're going to publish it in one of the Class C or Class D journals, because they're the only ones that are going to accept it. And so that's basically what happens with scientific investigation of the paranormal. It's ongoing. It goes through peaks and valleys. In the 70s, it was a lot bigger than it is now because it was an era that was much more open to the idea of the paranormal than the one that we're living in now. But there have been scientists who looked at the paranormal as far as I can tell, back into the 1850s. And as a matter of fact, if somebody says name a scientist, they're going to name Einstein. And Einstein had a friend who was a psychologist. And this psychologist had spent a long time investigating telepathy. And he sort of wanted to know if Einstein thought that physics said that he was drawing dead on this particular subject. And Einstein said, "It seems to me, at any rate, that we have no right from a physical standpoint to deny a priori the possibility of telepathy. For that sort of denial, the foundations of our science are too unsure and too incomplete." And believe me, I'm not the person to put words in Einstein's mouth. But Einstein said this in about the 1930s or 40s, and he died in 1955. But my guess is that if Einstein were to come back now, he'd look around and he'd say, physics has made remarkable strides since my death. But I'm still willing to stand by what I said then. We cannot a priori rule out the possibility of telepathy on the basis of what physics has learned. So it's still something that scientists can investigate. It's an open question, but unless you're very rich, in which case you can go off and do whatever you want because, you don't have to worry about putting food on the table or a roof over your head. Unless you're very rich or you're already sufficiently well established like Brian Josephson that you don't have to worry what everybody says, scientists are reluctant to investigate it.
Very true. And yeah, that was the angle I was going to work with. I'm pretty sure it was an anonymous type of survey and stuff because, it is, like you said, difficult to write the grant to get the money from academia to actually investigate these kind of things, and is, like you said, a death sentence for a lot of individuals when they want to jump out there unless you are super famous or rich. One person that comes to my mind is Robert Bigelow. I don't know if you're familiar with that guy's name, but he does Bass Aerospace, and he's looking to put basically units up in orbit so people can vacation around the Earth, in orbit type thing. And he's connected with Skinwalker Ranch and a lot of paranormal UFO activity out there, supposedly. And he's not beholden to anyone to produce results or to publish anything, but he's definitely done a lot of work out there. He's got the money to do it, and he can sit on all that information till the cows come home, and not have to worry about ridicule at all.
Well, yeah, I think that these are sufficiently interesting and important questions that they deserve investigation. And they deserve investigation by people who are competent to do investigations. And certainly my feeling is that if somebody, a typical professor, at an institution might make somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 a year. And as a matter of fact, professors can be bought. And the price isn't really all that high. There's a guy named Steven Weinberg who also won a Nobel Prize in Physics, who was a professor of physics at Harvard. And believe me, Harvard's a pretty good school. They actually gave my father a degree, so so they're a pretty good school. And here he was, they're taught, I was obviously being a little tongue-in-cheek there because they're at the top of the ladder. And in the 1980s, the University of Texas went to Steven Weinberg and said, interested in some money? We'd love to have you at the University of Texas. And I don't think for him what they offer, Beyonce or what they offer Kobe Bryant or somebody like that. My guess is that they probably offered him double or triple his salary. And he moved from Boston, which is very civilized, to Austin, Texas, which might be civilized. I've never been there. But he was willing to do it. And so it's not so impossible to buy reputable scientists. And if somebody has the money like this, like this Robert Bigelow, whom I don't know, hey, I can be bought. I'm about to retire. I'm about to retire, and all I got is a pension. So if he's interested, I'm a reasonably reputable scientist, and boy, I'm for sale.
There you go.
My feeling is that every man should have his price, because if you don't, you're a fanatic, and you got to watch out for these people.
That's right. You're even crazier than people think.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Sorry about that. I was taking a drink here.
Sure.
Yeah, I've always kind of had... Well, actually, a mathematician get into this kind of thing, because it seems like most of... Like, I know you said that everything started when you were around 10, and that's where you got to start with it. But I know you've established yourself in the academic world as a mathematician. You've written plenty of books based on that subject. I know you got one, How's Math Explain the World, and plenty of other books out here, The Right Decision. Let's see. And you're also a blogger for Psychology Today. Fantastic. How math can save your life. Interesting. Wallet, that's for sure.
That's a part of it. But anyway, what got me into writing this book, The Paranormal Equation, was actually a combination of events. First of all, I tend to be a little skeptical about it. I mean, I find it extremely interesting, but my feeling is, even though I'm not from Missouri, I have the Missouri attitude of show me. And I know that they've, that even though there have been a lot of studies done of a lot of different things, they haven't been enough to convince the scientific community. And I've talked with a guy who actually was a very well-established scientist, and he had a very mainstream career, but he threw it over to investigate paranormal phenomena. He believes that human consciousness affects the laws of the universe. And that's an extremely important point of view, and it would absolutely be fantastic to establish something like that. And I wish him the best of luck. But he's discussed some of the things that he said that he believes in, and he says he feels that it should convince a reasonably rational and unprejudiced individual. And he may be right, but there's no question that the scientific establishment is prejudiced in some ways. And one of the ways that it's prejudiced is that science is very conservative. It takes a lot to become part of established science. And what happens is there are the people who are at the top of the game, just any game that there is, any endeavor, whether it's business, whether it's entertainment, whether it's sports, there are people who've climbed top of the ladder. And usually they like to stay in their position for a variety of reasons. And so there's a tendency that even though I believe that science is totally open, when it comes to something that is unconditionally convincing, when it comes to something that's marginal, not so open. And nonetheless, I think it's important that the scientific community stay at least open enough to be willing to have people who will go off and investigate this. But I got into it because I have a couple of good friends who are very, very hardcore scientists, but they have strong beliefs in this. One of them, for instance, says that he's walked into rooms several times in his life, and he's known what's going to be in those rooms, even though he's never seen pictures of them or heard them described before. And I was talking to him, and he said, that there are three types of facts, Jim. There are the known facts, the unknown facts, and the unknowable facts. And because this guy's a scientist, he's a medical researcher, and he got his degree from Harvard Medical School. I didn't take this as some sort of 1970s New Age thought. I thought about it for a while because, of course, when you think about known facts, that's obvious. Mount Everest is the highest mountain on the planet. That's a known fact. Unknown fact, is there life on Mars? Don't know. But whether there is or there isn't, and boy, I'll tell you, I would absolutely love to find out. Either there is or there isn't. One way or another, it's not it's a fact. It just happens to be unknown whether there is or there isn't. But the unknowable facts had me a little puzzled for a while. And then I realized after a while that mathematics had actually discovered the idea of what constitutes unknowable facts. And it happened in the 1930s. You can stand a very short detour, and you're willing to... I found that when you talk about mathematics, people are sort of interested. I mean, after all, that's why the show Numbers was a hit. But if you actually say x squared plus 4 equals 19, they turn off so fast it'll make your head spin. So I promise you nothing like that.
Yeah, go for it then.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that mathematics does is it establishes truth by means of proof. And I'm only going to mention something called the Pythagorean theorem, which was discovered by a guy named Pythagoras, not surprisingly, about 500 years before the birth of Christ. You probably saw it in your geometry class. You may or may not remember it, but all you have to know is it has something to do with right triangles. It's a truth about right triangles. And if you think about it, there's no way you can establish this by going around and measuring every single right triangle there is to see whether it's true, because there are infinitely many right triangles. So what you have to do is you have to do most of mathematics is about. You set up an axiom system. Euclid did this. He described the axioms of geometry, and then you work with logic in order to prove various facts logically from these axiom systems. That's what Pythagoras did. And up until the 1930s, mathematicians thought that everything that you could do in mathematics was either going to be, if you were to make a statement in mathematics, it would either be false, and you could find an example which would show that it would be false. For instance, suppose that I were to say to you, the sum of two odd numbers is an odd number. You'd scratch your head a bit and you'd say, hey, wait a minute, 3 plus 5 is 8, 3 and 5 are odd, 8 is even. Okay, so you're wrong about that one. Okay. So that's not that's not a true statement. But mathematicians thought that every true statement that there was in mathematics, you could logically prove. And there was a guy named Kurt Gödel, an Austrian logician, who in the 1930s showed that there were true facts about mathematics that mathematics itself could not prove. And that's not a bizarre, otherworldly statement. What it's a statement about is it's a statement about the limits of logic. It's that we think that logic is this sort of all-powerful tool. Well, duh, it's not. And that's what Gödel showed, is that there are limits even to logic. And it struck me that even though I hadn't seen this done, if you look at what science talks about when it studies the real world, it talks about things to which numbers are applicable. It talks about things like mass and length and time and force and energy and stuff like that. Things that are measured by numbers. And what Gödel said is the things that are measured by numbers, that you're never going to know whether or not they're true. And so it occurred to me that, hey, what we're dealing with when we deal with the physical universe is we deal with things that are measured by numbers. That's what science does. That's what physics is. That's what chemistry is. And if it turns out that there are truths about the universe that are measured by numbers that we can never establish, you might be talking about something that, like the paranormal, we may never know. It might be true, and we may never be able to establish it. And so that's the chain of thought that got me to write the book.
Fantastic. There you go. It's always the need to explore the unknown, right? That should spark the interest in the humans to go after these things.
I think that's one of the reasons that even though, for instance, you're not going to get me to believe in ghosts until one comes up and just bats me in the head or something like that, I personally feel that, from what I gather, they have very thin bodies, so it's going to be difficult for them to do that. But nonetheless, I feel that until you show that something is not possible, what you do is you classify it as somewhere on the likely to unlikely scale. And I have ghosts in there under very unlikely. But my feeling is that if you want to go into what you think is a haunted house, take some equipment, measure whatever it is you want to measure, and come out concluding that there are ghosts, well, my feeling is this is a lot, you're doing a lot more of a service. What you may be doing, pardon my saying this, is probably scientifically worthless. But if nothing else, it's keeping your mind open, number one. And number two is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a lot better than all the inane stuff I see on Facebook and Twitter, because you're trying to find out something about the world. And that's what science is. Science says, well, there are two things we do. We invest to find out the way the world is, and then what we try and do is we try and weave them together into these grandiose theories that explain a lot of things, and hopefully will explain things that we don't know, and not only that, will explain things in such a way that we can create better lives for ourselves. And quite frankly, I don't see how going into haunted houses is going to do that, but knock yourself out.
There you go. So these supposed hotbeds, you don't think that this sort of activity that needs to be investigated, that comes with paranormal phenomena?
Well, I think that
just these spots, then.
I think that there are different types of paranormal. Paranormal and supernatural tend to be very, very, very wide classifications of stuff. And for instance, the only thing I know about zombies, for instance, is there was a song called Zombie Jamboree back in the 1950s, and I think there's some sort of alcoholic concoction called a zombie. But that's the limit of my knowledge on zombies. And I'm spending absolutely zero time on that. I'm probably not going to see World War Z or whatever, because that stuff sort of icks me out when I see it. But nonetheless, the stuff that intrigues me are things that are the areas that refer to things that do have some hope of either being scientifically established or proven not to be true. And I think that the extensions of the human capabilities are where there's a lot of good potential work that could be done. For instance, one of the individuals that I've talked to is a guy named Dean Rayton. This is the individual that I referred to, who was a very, very well-established scientist who said, I'd rather do something I'm interested in than this stuff. And so he went off, and he's the person interested in showing that human consciousness has an effect upon the workings of the universe. And my feeling is that if he can establish that unequivocally, that is one of the great discoveries of all time. That's an absolute game changer on all sorts of levels. And I would love to see him either establish that or prove that it isn't true. I mean, I've had a discussion about him along the following lines. Take something that's pretty easy to understand, the idea of radioactive decay. All substances that decay radioactively do at a fixed rate, as far as we know. And that fixed rate enables such things as radioactive dating of old bones and the various minerals that appear on Earth, and it's how we know how old various things are. Is it possible that human thought can influence the rate of radioactive decay? Boy, if it could, our entire view of the universe changes. I can't think of anything that would be more fascinating than that. Now, as far as I'm concerned, discovering something like that is worth I don't know whether or not it's possible, but the value of such a discovery would be so incredibly enormous that it's worth pursuing on a long shot. Now, my feeling is ghosts may, suppose you discover that there are ghosts, then what?
Good point. What happens next at that point? Because, I guess then you would have to try to say, is there an afterlife at that point? And if you've decided that there is one, then what? What can you do with it? Because you're still alive, I guess it's establish how to stay in communication, I guess?
I guess, one of the, you've touched on another topic, which is another reason that scientists are very uncomfortable investigating this. There is one hell of a lot of fraud associated with it. Because, you have people who want, the history is that when you lose a loved one, and you lose a loved one unexpectedly or tragically, there's this sense of loss and incompleteness, and you want it to continue. And you would love for people to tell you that yes, there is a way that you can communicate with someone that you loved and lost prematurely or tragically. And interestingly enough, there was a very well-known physicist in the early portion of the 20th century, a guy named Oliver Lodge. And he and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, were both very interested in the idea of whether or not it was possible to communicate with the afterlife, and they both had a need to do so because both of them lost sons prematurely in World War I. So they were linked by this common tragedy and a shared interest. But nonetheless, because it just opens the floodgate to somebody saying, yes, I can talk to your son or your daughter or your wife or your husband. And there has been so much fraud that, science is really very uncomfortable with it. Because you can escape, in the scientific community, you can have a view that as long as it's off base, you can go off and investigate it, and then when you say, okay, I want to come back to the mainstream now, they're perfectly willing to have you. But if you do anything that perpetrates or smacks of fraud, you are dead. At least you are dead as far in the scientific community. They'll never let you back.
Exactly, and so you should be. You should be exiled and raked over the coals for every bit of that, because not only are you trashing paranormal investigation and, relegating it to the garbage can as if it isn't already, but you're exploiting individuals, like you said, that have an interest in communicating with a loved one or a lost, someone that they lost, and that's pretty much the highest form of garbage in the field, and it's rampant with it,
Yeah, but unfortunately there's a lot of fraud in government and politics, and these people seem to have 9 lives like a cat. They come back again and again and again.
They've just got good PR firms.
PR.
Instead of buying a shiny T-shirt. So, money better spent, let's put it that way, smarter individuals business-wise, and that's what kills me, because I like to say that a lot of the time with a lot of the paranormal investigators and ufologists and Bigfoot hunters and all that. A lot of them are selling products, and they have to protect that to the bitter end, because that product is their livelihood, and if you have to go back to the drawing board and rebrand yourself because it got pissed on, well, they'll go do that, like you said, 9 lives.
Yeah. Well, I can understand that, and certainly one of the things that when I started investigating the paranormal, what I did was I looked at a lot of the websites, and there's no question that practically all these people are selling something, and you got to be real careful. I mean, I think we're probably coming fairly close to the break, but there were a couple of things that I saw that were sort of in common of websites that I'd like to tend to warn people about, because sort of, you can spend your money, if you want to spend your money on this stuff, there are people who might not, who might be very sincere, but there are sort of a few red flags that smack of fraud to me, so I can talk about that later.
Talk about those red flags when we come back from the break here?
Be delighted.
Fantastic. Thanks. Sorry to cut you off like that. Real quick, tell everybody where they can find your book, The Paranormal Equation.
Okay, well, Google is good. Amazon is good. Just Google Paranormal Equation Stein and it'll come up, or go to Amazon and do the same thing.
Fantastic. Boom. There it is. And we are just about to hit the break here without making Joe have a heart attack. That's for sure. And that's the name of the game right there. We got to have a nice, healthy JoJo. to keep this ship running. So we will be back in about 8-10 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark. Stick around, get a drink, go to the bathroom, get something to eat, do your thing. We'll be back at UFO Paranormal Radio Network with James Stein, author of The Paranormal Equation, and we'll do some more talking about that book and paranormal in general.
Hey everybody, this is Jill Marie Morris from Perspective X. If you've been searching for a variety talk radio show with an edge, then look no further. Join my co-host Stephanie Benetti and I as we get down and dirty discussing the latest hot topics and relevant newsworthy stories. Informative, engaging, and quite often controversial, Perspective X is a unique blend of insight, opinion, and wit. So tune in and listen every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. on UPRN 107.9 FM New Orleans. It's not just an opinion, it's our perspective. Perspective X.
Hi everybody, this is Erica Getch. I hope to see you on Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific on the Galactic Connection, keeping you connected 1 hour at a time. For more information, please visit thegalacticconnection.com.
You are listening to UPRN 107.9 New Orleans.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can catch us every Saturday night, 8 p.m., where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome back to hour number 2, The Mind-Cemetery, with your hosts Chip and Nicole. The phone lines are open, and the number is 504. Welcome back to hour number 2, The Mind-Cemetery, with your hosts Chip and Nicole. The phone lines are open, and the number is 504-273-7379. You can join the discussion in UFO Paranormal Radio Network's Pal Talk chat room with our guests, the hosts, or give any feedback you'd like. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Visit our website, Mind-Cemetery.com, for upcoming show news and blogs.
Yes, thank you once again for joining us for hour number 2 here with author James Stein, who wrote The Paranormal Equation, a new scientific perspective on remote viewing, clairvoyance, and other inexplicable phenomena. Pretty good conversation going here today, and Jim's very good at explaining his opinion and his viewpoints and the scientific end of it, and that's something that I haven't had on in a very long time on the show. Is an actual scientist instead of a pseudo-scientist, which ufology and paranormal fields are just filled with. And when we were leaving off the first hour, we were talking about when you go and look for a paranormal group to possibly come in and do some investigations in your house, what flags that he's come across that seem to be pretty universal. And I think, Jim, we left off there, if you don't mind, pick up the ball and fun.
I'd like to, but before I do that, I'd sort of like to recover an earlier fumble. You remember that you were asking which bulletin that, which journal that study was done in, which showed that more than 50% of the science professors felt that ESP was either a reality or very likely.
Uh-huh.
I looked it up. It's called Psychological Bulletin, and it's pretty high up there on the prestige list. It's a publication of the American Psychological Association, and that's the most credible organization dealing with psychology as far as I know. So it's a highly credible study. They did it, they did it in the approved fashion, and it isn't so much a study, that particular survey isn't so much a study of what the paranormal is as what people's views or professors' views of what the paranormal is. So not the same thing. But I did want to, because you did ask that question, and fortunately we have Google and all sorts of other stuff, I wanted to get that out of the way. But one of the red flags that I've seen in my investigation is whenever you see a website which says quantum mechanics supports, and then it says like paranormal phenomena or telepathy or something like that, quantum mechanics does absolutely nothing of this sort. Quantum mechanics is a tremendously deep and profound subject. It had its origins at the turn of the 20th century, and it really came up with some revolutionary ways of looking at things. It changed not only the way that we thought the universe was, but it also changed some of the ideas in philosophy, some of the ideas in psychology, some of our ideas on what reality consists of. But there have been some books written about quantum mechanics which point out that some of its ideas are very similar to those that have been espoused by various Eastern philosophies. There was a very interesting book written in the 1970s by a physicist called The Tao of Physics, and what he was doing is he was discussing how various ideas in quantum mechanics paralleled ideas in Eastern philosophy. Now, the idea is that the mode of thinking sort of comes up with some similar types of viewpoints, but it's an analogy. It's not saying Eastern mysticism is in any way validated by quantum mechanics. The things that quantum mechanics validates are stuff like lasers, or stuff like electroencephalographs, because you can build them based on what quantum mechanics says. But quantum mechanics is a tremendously intriguing and difficult to understand subject, even for physicists. In fact, Niels Bohr, who was one of the foundations, one of the leading scientists in the early theory of quantum mechanics, said, if quantum mechanics hasn't profoundly shocked you, then you haven't understood it yet. And there's a lot about it that we still don't understand, and the stuff about quantum mechanics that we don't understand is on the level of photons and electrons and atoms. Quantum mechanics hasn't even come close to talking about cells. It hasn't come close to talking about collections of cells constitute organs. It hasn't come close to talking about organs such as the brain or individuals. And so when you see a website that says recent developments in quantum mechanics support blah, 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 trust me, it doesn't. And that's a red flag. Now, it's a red flag. I'm not telling you that the people who write these are out and out frauds. They may just be guilty of repeating stuff and are a little sloppy. I know I've done that a whole lot myself, so I can sort of overlook it. But if somebody starts waving quantum mechanics at you, start looking at them with suspicion, because this is one of the things that I noticed. Invariably, when I saw somebody make a statement about quantum mechanics, it was either unsubstantiated or dead wrong. And that was uniform. And I didn't look at, maybe I looked at somewhere between 10 and 20 websites which had this on it. And maybe somewhere in the zillions of websites that are out there, there's one that talks about quantum mechanics sensibly, that isn't about science. It's about the paranormal, but I don't know it. I didn't find it. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is, surprisingly, astrology and numerology, because these are not, I don't know whether or not I would put this under the heading of paranormal, but it's certainly something that a lot of people are interested in. And people always want to know, okay, what's your take on this? Because you're a scientist. And my take on it is that, first of all, I consider them to be benign forms of entertainment. And one of the things that you'll find among a lot of scientists, if you start mentioning astrology or numerology, their face will get red, and they'll say, "This isn't science." Well, at one stage, astrology was science. Astrology was originally formulated by a scientist who lived about 2 centuries after Christ. His name was Ptolemy, and he was a brilliant, brilliant scientist, possibly the most brilliant scientist of his era. And he looked at everything he knew and came up with the idea of astrology to explain a bunch of phenomena. And I remember hearing a lecture by Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling was one of the great scientists of the 20th century. He won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry, one for peace, and he barely missed a 3rd Nobel Prize. So really, really brilliant individual. And he was giving a lecture at a college, and there was a Q&A session afterwards, and one of the students there asked Pauling what about astrology. And Pauling thought for a few seconds and said basically what I did, that astrology was formulated by Ptolemy, who was a brilliant, brilliant scientist. But he said he thought that, this is Pauling speaking now, Pauling said that he thought that Ptolemy was such a good scientist that if you were to bring Ptolemy back today and show him what we've learned about the world, he would disown astrology because he would say it's just not capable of dealing with the world, and there are much more sophisticated ideas out there. And in that sense, I don't think astrology is science. But on the other hand, it's certainly entertaining. My feeling is that, judging as somebody who found it hard to get a date in the 1960s, possibly because of my general overall geekiness, but nonetheless, if nothing else, what you did at the time was you armed yourself with a cursory knowledge of astrology, and you went to an attractive girl, and I think you're a Libra, or you look like a Libra. That at least started the conversation, so astrology has social value, especially it did back in the 1960s and 1970s. Might not be a sophisticated pickup line these days, but good enough for me back then. And as far as numerology is concerned, that's a harder sell, because numerology asks you to believe that there are properties of numbers that nobody has come close to establishing. Mathematics, in fact, I describe an experience in my book. I went to a party, this was in the 1980s, and the hostess introduced me to an attractive young lady, and she said, "Judy, I'd like you to meet Jim. He's a mathematician." And this had never happened to me before. Judy's eyes absolutely lit up. She said, "I've always to meet a mathematician." Nobody wants to meet mathematicians. Trust me on this. They think we're going to give you quizzes or something like that. Just reminds you of all those bad experiences you had in algebra. But anyway, Judy said, "I've always wanted to meet a mathematician." So this lasted for about 2 seconds until she said, "Tell me, why is 9 the master number?" Well, I knew she wanted to meet a numerologist. Just my luck. But virtually nothing about numerology makes any sort of sense at all. But on the other hand, I said, I regard these things as benign forms of entertainment because They're benign in the sense that if you look at the astrology column in most of today's newspapers, there'll be a disclaimer that this stuff is meant for entertainment, so that's fine. And also, soccer is a form of entertainment. Hundreds of millions of people watch soccer. Tremendously entertaining activity, at least if you're a European, not so much if you're an American. Anyway, if you take a look at what happens in soccer, they have soccer riots. Thousands of people have been killed in soccer riots. I don't know of a single person who's even gotten a broken fingernail from an astrology riot or a numerology riot. So, as far as I'm concerned, a lot, basically harmless stuff. You there?
I'm sorry about that. I had it muted for a second.
No problem.
I was going to ask you about where numerology falls into all this, being the mathematician and all. So,
well, that's what we think about it. I mean, I don't think you'll find a single mathematician who puts any stock whatsoever in numerology. And incidentally, nonetheless, I think that numerology could conceivably serve a valuable purpose in the following sense. What's science and engineering and mathematics about? They're about numbers. Obviously there's a lot more science and engineering than just numbers, but they work with systems that are built on numbers. And for an awful lot of people, numbers are a complete and total turnoff. But anybody who's a numerologist is fascinated by numbers. They're looking at numbers as possible ways to explain things. I got news for them. Numbers do explain things. They explain a whole lot, but they explain it in the format of mathematics, science, and engineering. If out of every 100 persons that's interested in numerology, I could just find one that I could flip, like flipping a house, and flip them into a study of mathematics, science, and engineering, the things that really matter, such as finding a cure for cancer, finding a cheap source of energy, all the things that we want science and engineering to do for us. A numerologist turned science to be able to do that, and it's happened in the past. One of the greatest scientists of all time started life as an astrologer, a guy by the name of Johannes Kepler, who essentially formulated the data and the first laws of astronomy that were known in the early portion of the 17th century. And Kepler was originally started out as an astrologer, and he was so good an astrologer that all the students in his school asked Kepler to cast their horoscopes for him. And after a while, Kepler got interested in the orbits of the planets, what the paths of the planets were. And this is something it interested Ptolemy, too, the guy who came up with the idea of astrology. And Kepler spent 20 years mulling over the data. Of course, they didn't have computers then. And he formulated what are known as Kepler's laws of planetary motion. And without Kepler's laws of planetary motion, we'd be a lot further behind in science and engineering than we are now. Exactly. So we owe that to an astrologer.
Nice. There you go. Gotta love that. Have you yourself ever been on any paranormal investigations or anything like that with any groups in your area?
No, I haven't. The closest, I haven't had paranormal experiences myself, but I have had, I have had a lot of friends talk to me about this, because I have two types of friends. I have the scientific friends and the non-scientific friends. And as I said, it's surprising to me, but a lot of the scientific friends have had things that seem to me to be paranormal experiences or paranormal belief. They're more open to it as individuals. In other words, they're willing to look at it. I'm not sure that they're willing to present a paper to the American Physical Association or something like that, but nonetheless, they would certainly be willing to think about it and entertain the possibility, because in that respect, they're open. And also, my friends who are non-scientists know that I'm open to the idea. because, as I said, this is genuinely fascinating stuff. And if you don't find it fascinating, my feeling is there's something wrong with you. Go back to retweeting stuff. But I mean, my feeling is that there's nothing worthwhile on Twitter, and if you have to retweet it, you're essentially reprocessing stuff that has no value to begin with. But that's just, you're talking to somebody from the standpoint of who lived most of his life prior to, most of my life was lived in the 20th century. Love computers, love email, love the internet. Social networking makes absolutely no sense to me. Go out and meet people. Shake hands.
Yep, exactly. Do yourself a favor and keep human contact in there. You mentioned Einstein earlier. His biggest thing was having a generation of idiots, basically, because of these things. And here we are. We're square in the middle of it. Fully well on our way to a generation of idiots. That's for sure. I totally understand the thought process of it hasn't happened to you, so you don't believe it, because that's where I'm fully entrenched in the Bigfoot world. I've done a few paranormal, or been in on a few paranormal investigations. I believe I've seen someone in my house as a kid, out of the corner of my eye type stuff, and it's just, you're right, and I can't really blame you for not being on board if you haven't experienced it yourself. And it's kind of like the light bulb aha moment for a lot of individuals until something like that does happen to them. It's seeing is believing kind of thing, like you said.
One of the things that I do not disparage is objective reality. For instance, you walk into a room, you got a bunch of thermometers, they all measure 80 degrees. The temperature in the room is 80 degrees. That's subjective reality. Subjective reality is how you view things, and that's every bit as real. For instance, one of the things that I know is under the heading of paranormal phenomena is near-death experiences. At least my impression is that that's in paranormal phenomena. Would you place it there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, in fact, there was an extremely popular book written recently called Proof of Heaven, which I didn't read, but I read a long survey of, that was published in the New Yorker magazine. And my doctor friend, the one who has had the experiences of deja vu, gave it to me to read. And I looked at it. And one thing that I am firmly convinced is that I am firmly convinced that near-death phenomena are legitimate, because virtually everybody who has a near-death phenomenon or near-death experience, they have similar experiences, even if they've never been exposed to it before. For instance, if, there are people who've, they've never heard of the topic of near-death experience. They have one. They see this bright light. They get similar types of ideas. So I would certainly be willing to believe that there is a linking of people who have shared this experience, linked in the sense that they've shared a common experience. And it's a valid experience. But whether or not this experience tells us that there's some sort of afterlife on the other side, I'm dubious about that. Because one of the things that occurred to me is I've worked with computers ever since the 1950s, and pretty primitive in the 1950s. And one of the things that most computers do is they have some sort of program that goes when you're in power down mode. And it occurred to me that one of the things that might very well happen is that when a human being or any animal is in an extreme situation where they're very close to death, what has happened is it may very well be possible that those people who have had similar experiences have survived. In other words, by transmitting this program to the brain, because all we do is, we're great survival mechanisms, and evolution is a wonderful tool for enabling winning strategies to survive. And maybe the winning strategy for the brain that enables you to survive in this in this extreme situation is to make you feel very warm, comfortable, and peaceful, and this is how it does it. And so it occurs to me that there can be a perfectly rational explanation for near-death phenomena. Now, it could also be that, yes, the other side of it is, the afterlife, and you're getting a look at it. I think that's highly unlikely. But I think my explanation is more likely, but there's no proof either way. And it's certainly a question that I feel is worth investigating. And there are a whole lot of paranormal phenomena questions that are worth investigating. And when you mentioned this guy, Robert Bigelow, whom I'd never heard of, but fair is fair. He's never heard of me. So my feeling is I'm glad that there are rich people out there. And if your Mildred dies and she isn't going to leave the money to you, for God's sake, have her leave it to somebody who wants to investigate these rather than a home for stray cats.
Exactly. This isn't no Hemingway house for cats here. We're going to take that money and do something a little.
Whoops, I just lost you. You there?
Yep, I'm back. There we go. We just had a little hiccup there, I guess.
Okay, well, I always wonder whether or not those are paranormal phenomena at work, but I think it's more likely that there's, cosmic rays or sunspots or...
No, it's just a balding man in the bayou messing with us. No.
It's Terry, so I said Louisiana. I don't know if I pronounced it right.
No, I'm over here in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I'm actually from the Chicago area, so
Hi.
So yeah, that's why I don't have the southern twang going on here.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have the southern twang either, but I'm originally, but I think I lost the accent.
Yeah, it happens slowly but surely. Yeah, just wait till you get drunk; it'll come back out.
You're drunk. Once truth comes out while you're drunk.
That too.
Not to be drunk.
Yeah, there you go. It's a good thing to avoid then. Yes. Yeah, that's when I was doing stuff with my wife and she would come out on the investigations with us, she would I would classify her as a denialist and not even a skeptic, and there was stuff there was a paperweight on a desk that actually moved, back and forth, or at least sounded like it moved because I didn't actually see it. So we, went around to see, okay, well, what makes the same noise and all that kind of good stuff, right? And it's like, well, if you're a hardcore denialist and not a skeptic because you're a denialist, then you're not even going to believe the stuff when it happens to you, which is a shame, I think, for a lot of people. But, those people have their own individual issues with anything paranormal or UFO related to begin with, because frankly it shatters your perceptions of reality, and I think that's a big part of skepticism as a whole.
Well, I think that denial and skepticism are linked. I just think that denial is slightly to the right of skepticism. But my feeling is that if a UFO were to land on your lawn, your wife would be a believer. And I think most people are rational in that they will accept incontrovertible evidence. You might at first say, well, is somebody trying to open my eyes in one way or another? I mean, I love magic shows. Whenever I go to Las Vegas, I try to see a magic show. I try to figure out how they do it. Most of the time I can't. Occasionally I can. But these people are just masters of the art. And
yep.
Of course, to a certain extent, when you go to one of these shows, you know that you're going to see things that are going to trick you, and they're going to be entertaining. And certainly, if a UFO shows up on the lawn, well, what I want to do is I wanted to do some UFO-y type stuff. Something that will really impress me, because otherwise I'll believe that, maybe somebody planted it here as a practical joke. But there are things that I would certainly believe. For instance, I do not believe that human consciousness affects the phenomena of the universe. I believe that human consciousness affects other human beings. I think it can affect society. I think it can affect a lot of things, but I don't think it's affecting radioactive decay. But if you show incontrovertible experiment with all the standard legitimate protocols in which it can be demonstrated that human consciousness does affect such things as radioactive decay or the speed of light or any one of the basic building blocks of the universe, I'll be a believer. And I think that most people who are not absolutely brainwashed would, and I don't, I've never met you, I've certainly never met your wife, but most people aren't that brainwashed. They may be really, you can say somebody's skeptical. I'm skeptical but open. You got to convince me.
Yeah.
Some people you have to convince harder, and that's one of the key points that differentiates the physical sciences from the social sciences and to a certain extent the life sciences. Because in the physical sciences, the standard of proof has to be very high. You may remember last summer they discovered something called the Higgs boson,
yep,
which was a great stepping stone for science. They weren't going to say we've got it until basically the chances that the probability that their observations had happened by chance, not by Higgs boson, was 1 in several million. But in experiments in psychology or social science, the threshold, the gold level, isn't 1 in several million. It's in 95%. If it happens 95% of the time if it would only happen 5% of the time by chance, social science will accept it because it's just much harder to establish something here. And the same is true of people's level of skepticism. Some people might be, skeptical to a higher degree than others, but everybody, I think, has their threshold which you have to pass. And I remember, have you ever done jury duty?
No, unfortunately, and I probably won't ever get selected for it. I'm in law enforcement now, so I'll get immediately kicked out.
They throw you out. But anyway, I've served as alternate juror, which is, believe me, the worst of both worlds. That's happened to me twice. I've listened to it, but unfortunately, you don't get to vote. But one of the things that that I asked the judge called us into chambers and says, "Do you want to ask me some questions?" And I said, "Yes. What is beyond a reasonable doubt?" I wanted him to quantify it.
Yep.
And he wouldn't do it. He said, "Okay, it's up to you to establish what's beyond a reasonable doubt." Because it varies from person to person. And the same is true for acceptance of paranormal phenomena. There may be paranormal phenomena going on that you've investigated that actually would, that are legitimate and pass your threshold of doubt, but they won't pass your wife's threshold of doubt. But in order for it to be established as legitimate phenomena, it's got to pass some scientific organization's threshold of doubt. Until then, it's up in the air.
That's a good point. I never could stand that reasonable doubt thing anyway, because, everybody's definition of reasonable is so different and ridiculous, so subjective, and it shouldn't be. Yeah. But you're right, not even some of those smart lawyers can quantify it.
You're in law enforcement, but I always, my social studies skills were pretty small, but I was always under the impression that, that our system is set up in such a way that you're innocent until proven guilty, and all these things are sort of devices that make it harder to prove you guilty. So, in a sense, it just occurred to me that in some sense the justice system is like science. It's really hard to establish it. And so you can be pretty confident. I mean, certainly the same is true of the justice system as it is of science. There have been things believed to be true because at one stage it was felt that it was established beyond a reasonable doubt, and later evidence showed that, oops, we were wrong about that. In fact, the history of science is the history of failed ideas. Science advances by having bad ideas overthrown, because somebody once said, if you don't have any ideas, It's far better to have a bad idea than to have no ideas at all, because a bad idea is a starting point. And if you're wrong, if you have a really terrible idea and you can show it's wrong, that's a step further towards the truth. And I think most scientists want to know what the truth is. And if the truth is that there is telepathy and if that really is the truth, if the truth and in fact, if the truth is that there's Bigfoot, there's ghosts, I say in the book that once ghosts are established beyond a reason, that they're scientifically establishing legitimate phenomena, trust me, there are going to be departments of ghostology in the schools of science everywhere, because scientists are dying to investigate legitimate new phenomena. It's just got to be legitimate.
That's for sure. About the Durham, the Ryan Research Institute, right?
Of course.
There you go. Good. There's a couple professors from Duke that would come over. We have a meetup group that we go to. What is it? The Carolina Hauntings, Apparitions, and Poltergeist Society here in Raleigh. Meet up once a month, and I used to have a lot of their guests as guest speakers as guests.
I think of the letters CHP. I think of California Highway Patrol. But I'm in.
I know it was tough to work that out of my brain for a little bit, but yeah, it's a great resource here in the local area, and it's a shame that there aren't more resources like that, for people to go to for these kind of things. When you see a lot of the investigative shows on TV, what gets you upset the most, you think? Do you think it's just pure garbage TV, or is it, like you were saying earlier, the only good part of it is that it's actually bringing the subject to the mainstream?
I think actually I don't get upset about it. I mean, first of all, I live in Los Angeles, which is centered around the entertainment industry, and sure. It's entertainment, and if people are entertained by it, fine. And not only that, it's entertainment that at least gets your mind functioning. How bad is that? I mean, is it any better or worse than crossword puzzles or Sudoku? No. And I'm certainly convinced it's a lot better for you than spending time on Facebook. I'd far rather have you go to the Carolina Haunting, whatever it was. I got the Carolina, and I forgot what the P was because there was P in there.
Apparitions and Poltergeist Society. There you go.
Poltergeist. Okay. Far rather have you do that. I think that what people have to realize is that probably a lot of these shows are rigged, because one of the things that happens, one of the things that I read about when I started writing the book is I would read about experiences such as precognitive experiences. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you are like me in the following sense. You wake up in the middle of the night, all of a sudden you have this sense of dread that something terrible has happened to either your spouse or a child or a loved one or someone you know. I think that's an almost universal phenomenon. And so here's what happens. Most of the time, you make the phone call or even tweet them, if that's what you do, and you find out everything's okay and you forget all about it and go back to sleep. But every so often, there really is that this precognitive experience turns out to reflect the truth. Something dreadful has happened. And that, of course, is what makes the newspapers, and that's what keeps people going. But for every one of these experiences, what happens is you've got this slew of other experiences that never went anywhere, and those go unreported. And so what's happening to me is that first of all, in a lot of these instances, I think it's, if the show didn't have anything, if absolutely nothing happened, and I have seen a couple of these shows in which nothing happened, and they were honest enough to say, okay, nothing happened. But if nothing happens all the time, people are going to stop watching. So what they have to do is they have to be pretty sure that something will happen to intrigue you. And let me tell you, if those magicians in Vegas can fool me, I'm sure they have a few special effects guys who can come up with something to come out to make the show interesting. And somebody asked me, well, what about these people who go in there with various pieces of scientific apparatus and measure stuff? It's not what science would refer to as a controlled experiment. In a controlled experiment, what you try to do is you try to control as many of the other variables that are running around as possible, keep them fixed so that they don't move, and just investigate one thing. But there's so many other things that are running around, and, a house, whether haunted or not, is a very complicated thing. We bought a house about 1.5 years ago, and there are things that go creak and things that go bump in the night, and I've traced most of them out. Yep. Most of them, what they are is, the house was built in 19, so it's not old, but of course what happens is things expand and contract in heat, and when things expand and the joints don't fit perfectly, if there's a little heat, you'll hear a creak. Okay, that can be pretty scary in a presumably haunted house. So, I tend to take these things with a grain of salt. They've basically shown me nothing that's going to convince me. But on the other hand, as I say, it's harmless entertainment. As long as they're not trying to, the things in which they're claiming to have contact with your dead mother, and they want you to pay $500 for a seance or whatever, that I'm really uncomfortable with. But, if you want to go into a presumably haunted house with a piece of electronic equipment and measure stuff, you're on the road to actually doing science. What you're doing isn't science. It's like when I poured chemicals together, when I poured vinegar and soap together when I was a kid to see what I would get. Soapy vinegar.
There you go. Nice. Yeah, that's something that I've struggled with our group and going out on investigations and stuff. I don't like the meters. I don't like the thermometer. I don't like any of it. I don't think that with the EVP, that whole phenomena there, nothing's repeatable in that aspect. I don't think that mainstream science will really ever give it the time of day, So my thing has always been like, why are we kind of, being like the redheaded stepchild at the dinner table at Thanksgiving, at the kids' table, begging for attention and doing these, scientific endeavors, like you said, of recording the data. If it's never going to be repeatable, it's like we're holding to standard science standards that are unattainable. So, but then again, we don't have anything better to go to. It's not like I've got a plan to go in another direction. All I know is that I don't like that one, of constantly looking for acceptance in a field that doesn't want to accept us in the front door, that is. It's always, like you said, in the back door, so to speak, of people who are well established, not afraid of, peer ridicule, and already have their money and will take the time to investigate those kind of things.
Well, I feel that, I think you're going to be the redheaded stepchild as long as you do something like that. But if you do, I suggested to this individual, I mentioned this individual who was interested in seeing whether or not human consciousness could affect the scientific laws that we think underpin the universe. My feeling is, if I were to, I can't talk to the Carolina Haunting Apparitions and Poltergeist Society, CHAPS.
Yeah, chaps.
Yep. But anyway, I can't talk to those chaps. But if I would say, why don't you try this? Instead of buying thermometers and going into haunted houses, here's what I would like to see. Get a Geiger counter. They're cheap. Get some radioactive stuff. Now, this is relatively simple. It's simple to measure. See if you can. And, there are presumably experts in yoga who are able to control their physiology to levels that are just incredible by standards that that are normally understood. My feeling is that see whether or not you can influence the rate of radioactive decay. It may not be as interesting as going into a haunted house, but if you had 100,000 ghost hunters doing this, you'd have solid data that you could at least draw a conclusion about. And that's the type of thing that I'd like to see. I mean, speaking from a scientist, I'd like to see something done. My feeling is you're going to come up dry, but if you don't, utterly fascinating, game changer, and it may not be as sexy as going into a haunted house, but nonetheless, it's got real possibilities for doing legitimate science. And it's science that I think is worth doing, because here's a great,
we just lost Jim for a second. We're repatching up with him and getting him back very soon. Hopefully he will be back. Jim, are you there? Nope. Trying to dial him up again. So
did I lose you?
Yes, just for a second there. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Not a problem. I was just summing up by saying how important is human consciousness? To human beings, tremendously important. But does it make a difference to the universe? What a fabulous question to find out the answer to. And your people could help.
Definitely.
Your people could help.
I kind of want to ask you, they've started getting into doing Skype conversations with people that weren't able to go there live, and I ended up providing them with a list of individuals I thought would be good for them and might possibly be able to hook up with them. It's very possible for you to be able to speak with this group sometime. If you'd be willing to do a Skype conversation, I think it's only like an hour,
Sure.
I'll get in touch with those folks.
I'm happy to. As I said, I'm a scientist who can be bought, but for something like this, it's fun. I'll do it for free.
And you're right up their alley of the kind of scientist that they like to hear from, the kind of person they like to hear from, because there's a lot of people that are in that group that are hard into sticking with the scientific method. And,
there are people who there are people who are less open than I am. But the point is that there are also people you want to be aware that there are people who are more open than I am. Josephson, and when I say this is a guy, I don't venerate anybody, but this is a guy who's obviously at the top of his game. He's written papers on what he believes to be the connection between quantum mechanics and paranormal phenomena. When you see a random website saying that, my opinion is it's garbage, or whether or not it's fraudulent garbage or just sloppy, repeated nonsense, I don't know. But when Brian Josephson writes about it, this is a serious scientist who has legitimate ideas on it. You got to pay attention to it. And the history of science is that there have been Einstein had some interest in it. Isaac Newton had interest in it. There were members of the Society for Psychical Research. Lord Rayleigh, who was a Nobel Prize in physics, who was a member of this society. There have been some great scientists who have felt that this is a legitimate question, and I'm a not so great scientist who feels that it's a legitimate question. So I'm perfectly happy to do what I can, and there's not much more that I'm going to be able to do in the way of mathematics. But if I can help to resolve what I consider to be one of the great questions that confronts the human race, how important is human consciousness? That would be a tremendous contribution for life. Tremendously worthwhile thing to do.
There you go. The last thing I wanted to sneak in here with our last 5 minutes is ask you about the remote viewing aspect of the book, The Paranormal Equation, that you wrote. And I had some questions from the chat room.
Sure.
Were you ever able to get in touch with Ingo Swann before he passed?
No, but I had, in fact, I had an interviewer tell me that about his impression of Ingo Swann. Impression of Ingo Swann. She was very influenced by him. I read a little about him, and I always wonder about situations like this, because if you have a bunch of people who are trying to predict the future, some of them are going to get it right just by chance. A friend of mine once said that if you had 1,000 people flipping coins, one of them is going to have heads come up 10 times, and the media is going to come and interview them about what mysterious power they have that got the coin to come up heads 10 times. But really, there was just a whole lot of garbage that you didn't see. And I can't really talk about Ingo Swann because I just don't know enough about it. But my a priori impression is that for every person who has legitimate precognitive experiences, there are a whole bunch who haven't, and so it's basically a random phenomenon until proven otherwise.
Another random question out of the chat room I'm going to fire at you real quick. Are you aware of an individual that is a neurosurgeon by the name of Evan Alexander?
Is he the person who wrote Proof of Heaven?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to get an answer.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yep. Okay, yes, I'm familiar with Proof of Heaven, and I actually went into a discussion of it earlier. Again, I don't think it's a proof of heaven. I think it's what our brains do when they're in power down mode and we're in under a situation of extreme stress. But I could be wrong.
I'm with you on that. Something definitely is going wacky with the brain at the end there, that's for sure. And it's hard to tell what exactly is,
the brain has survived 3.5 billion years of evolution have gone into creating the brain. We're probably never going to be able to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And we only use, 8%, 9%, maybe 7%, That's
my good days.
Exactly, right. There you go. So basically, I got a whole lot in today, and I'm glad you came in, and hopefully we can get
I'm delighted.
Together with.
You have my number. I'd be delighted to do it again, and I'd be delighted to have a Skype conversation with chaps.
There you go. Thanks.
No, I'd like it. I mean, I say if I think something is ridiculous, I'll say it. If I think something is plausible, I'll say it. And I'll tell you when it's an opinion and when I think there is scientific grounds for something. Because I like to think that I'm true to the credo of science in that you don't want to promulgate things that are false. You want to find out what's true, and if you don't know it, you have to be honest and say that I don't know where we stand on this.
There you go. And all else fails, just say you don't know, for God's sakes, and stop making it up as you go, right? There you go. Yeah, the Duke researcher there, professor out there, I just remember his name is Mark Leary, so hopefully he'll be in the room when we get to here. We'll see what
department is he in?
I didn't. It's probably psychology. I'm not sure right off the top of my head.
This is a very, very legitimate psychological topic. And one person who wrote a book that I read said that, in fact, what they did was they followed people as they went into haunted houses in England. And he said, we didn't learn that much about ghosts, but we sure learned a lot about how people react, and that's valuable.
There you go. I've always been impressed with what happens to the human monkey in extraordinary situations. One point in case, just introduce a little fire to people, Yeah. And see how fast you turn back into that human monkey.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you again for coming on, James. Very quick 2 hours. You're a great guy, very informative, and not full of a lot of fluff, which everybody likes. So.
Okay, it's been a pleasure.
Do your best to get out there and get the paranormal equation, a new scientific perspective on remote viewing, clairvoyance, and other inexplicable phenomena. And don't be scared, become a mathematician. It's an easy read, folks, and it's not going to kill you. So get out there and get it at Amazon. Just Google James Stein and Google the paranormal equation, and you'll find it. So, again, thanks, Jim, and we'll see if we can get everybody together for a chaps meetup sometime in the near future.
Okay, take care, Chuck.
No problem. Thank you very much. And that is our show for tonight, folks. Thank you all for joining us. It was fast and furious there, 2 hours. Like I said, Jim has a lot to say, and he's very informative and quick with the wit, and you got to love that kind of stuff in a guest. And hopefully we'll get in touch with him in the future and do it all again. So, Joe, if you're about ready to take us away next week, April 1st, for April Fools, I have Micah Hanks. If you're a listener of the network or any other podcast or Coast to Coast, you know who Micah Hanks is. Tune in, listen up, have a good time as usual. So, we'll see you all next week, and have a good night.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Mind Cemetery. You can join us every week, Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. If you're not able to catch our show live tonight, you can always download us on iTunes and listen to all our archives on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network homepage. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as visit Mind-Cemetery.com. Finally, a special thank you to producer and owner of the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, Joe Montaldo, for all his hard work each and every week. Be sure to visit the UFO Paranormal Radio Network homepage for archive updates nightly. Good night.
If you are listening to the show and wish to join us in the chat room, visit paltalk.com. Go to the social issues, select other, and enter the UFO Paranormal Radio